Class 8. We've been talking about a history of the Old Testament notion of sacrifice as the prefigure to the sacrifice of Christ, and then the sacrifice of Christ extended to the sacrifice of the Mass. And we did a lot of doctrine, and now yesterday and today, we're talking about our participation in the Mass. Our participation. Because as I said, I think yesterday, it's good to have all the doctrine, it's good to have all the right to understand properly, but then there comes a point to really make it worthwhile. We have to live it and use the Mass, employ the Mass for what it's really for, and that is to grow in grace. So, we're going with Abbot Marmion here when he has his section, his final section on the Mass, section 5, on participation. And he says it is the identifying of ourselves as fully as possible with Jesus Christ in his double office as priest and victim, so that we may be transformed unto him. Okay, so Christ is both priest and victim, and we have to participate to really fully and with the most, what's the word I'm looking for, with the most benefit to ourselves spiritually. We have to participate as much as possible in his priesthood and in his victimhood. We participate in a different way from him, in a different way, in a certain sense, from the priest, especially with regarding to the priesthood. But Abbot Marmion points out that, as we said before, Christ's anointing as priest came instead of not by the pouring of oil over the head of Aaron and the priest, or even the pour or the anointing of oil with the priesthood in the sacrament, but the pouring of the divinity into the humanity of Christ. Okay, and this is in a certain sense his anointing, makes him who he is as priest. But Abbot Marmion points out that we members, we cannot in principle separate ourselves from the head, which is Christ. And Christ is both priest and victim. And as Christ is both priest and victim, the supreme action of Christ, the one that sums up his entire life, is his sacrifice on the cross. Okay, that is the one action. That is why he came. It is for this purpose that I came into the world. Okay, this is the reason he came, for his sacrifice. So if that is the whole purpose of the priest, as for Christ, the head, and we are his members, then we must participate in that sacrifice if we are truly to be his members. Otherwise, we separate ourselves from him. We separate ourselves from his priesthood and his victimhood. We are not fully in union with Christ. So, how do we do this? Because we're not priests, starting with the priesthood. And Abbot Marmion says it's true that priests alone participate through the sacrament of holy orders in the priesthood, and only they have the right and the power to offer sacrifice. We don't have the power. We could stand on this table. We could even be in a church and have all the vestments and everything, and we could go through all the motions. This is my body. We could say the Latin perfectly. We could pray as best as we can. Nothing would happen. Remember what we talked about before. The essence of a sacrament is something happens. Sacraments are actions. They're not just prayers. Something happens. You pour the water onto the baby, something happens. Original sin is washed away, and you're filled with sanctified grace. Do you have your hand up?
I know you said you can't offer the sacrifice of the Mass. Can lay people still offer sacrifices?
They can, yeah, that's where we're going to get to. We make sacrifices.
Well, offer up,
we wouldn't sacrifice a goat at this point, though.
No, but we sacrifice, but we might sacrifice eating a steak.
Oh, that's...
We do it all the time during Lent.
Yes. So anyway, Only they can consecrate. Only they can offer Mass. But the faithful, though in a lesser way, have a real participation in the sacrificing priesthood by means of our baptism. By means of our baptism, we too, we're not priests, but we participate in that priesthood, and we can, with the priest, offer that sacred host by this union that we have. So we're offering the sacred host as if to say we are offering ourselves for this immolation. And we know this. Open your Bible to 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, where Peter says, you are a chosen generation, a kingly priesthood. He's talking to the laity here. A kingly priesthood, a holy nation, a purchased people. So when the priest offers the host and offers the chalice, we can in our own way make that offering with him. Okay, not that we have anything to do with transubstantiation. Remember, the Mass we talked about before, the Mass is a public act if the priest is all by himself offering it with no one around him. Cardinal Manzetti in his cell, all those prisoners in Auschwitz and throughout history who were in prison, the priests who were prisoners, they offer Mass alone in secret at 2 o'clock in the morning with no altar server. It is still a public act of the church. Okay, we cannot perform that public act, but we can participate in that public act, and we can do that offering too. We don't add anything to the host, in other words. We don't add anything to the transubstantiation, but actually we benefit by that participation. Again, Abbot Marmion, who's a Benedictine, and Benedictines are very liturgical. They have a strong liturgical life. They pray the office in common together. They usually have 2 masses a day, like a priest will have his own private mass in the morning, and then at 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning they will have a big conventional high mass every day. Because what is the Benedictine motto? Prayer and work. Prayer and work. And they're very much locked into the liturgical cycle, very much into liturgical acts, to the Mass. And so that's one of the great things about reading Abbot Marmion is he's always bringing in aspects of the Mass and aspects of the liturgy to make his point, and also to show how the liturgy is always teaching us Catholic doctrine.
Was that Abbot Marmion was a Benedictine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Abbot Marmion was a Benedictine. He's my favorite spiritual writer.
Oh.
But he says, what does the priest say after the offertory? He turns towards the people. Brethren, pray that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God the Father Almighty. Again, he says, for whom we offer, I think this is in the canon, for whom we offer, or who offer up to thee this sacrifice of praise for themselves and those belonging to him. Okay, again, it's not the priesthood of the sacramental priesthood, but it shows how closely we are united to Christ as priest. When even the Mass talks, the priest talks in terms of my sacrifice and yours to the congregation.
That's the erotic Rogers. Yes.
Yeah, my sacrifice and yours. Also, I had the missal here, and I don't know what happened to it. Do we have a missal anywhere?
Yeah, I think
I'll go cancel it and get it.
There it is, this one!
Oh, here it is. Because I think I had it marked.
Yeah.
In the canon of the Mass, we return to this theme in the Honkigitor. What do you do when the Honkigitor when he puts his hands over the
Ring the
chalice?
bells.
You ring the bells. That's right, little altar boy. We therefore beseech thee, O Lord, to accept this oblation of our service, as also of thy whole family. You see, the entire mystical body of Christ is joined in. Our service and also of thy whole family. Okay, so we are participating in this priesthood, and we are really deriving great grace and great benefit from all this. Again, as we said before, provided we bring these dispositions to Mass and think about them while Mass is going on. Everybody's distracted. Everybody has problems. That's one of the great things about the Mass, because no matter, as long as we have the really, truly the right intention to participate in the Mass, then the Mass has a tremendous amount of grace for us, even when we're distracted, even when we catch ourselves thinking about the donuts downstairs. The point is when you have a distraction, just ignore it and move back to what you're supposed to be. It's like Bishop Sheen always says, you don't drive it out, you crowd it out. You do that with evil in your life too. You don't drive it out, you crowd it out. You drive it out when you attack it directly. You crowd it out when you bring something else in. So if you find yourself distracted during the Mass, you just turn back to the Mass and bring the Mass back into yourself. Okay, so the Hankigitor. And remember too, the hands over the chalice, what does that remind you of? In the Old Testament, when the priest would put his hands over the goat and, as it were, transfer the sins of the people onto that goat that was going to be sacrificed. So, the priest who acts in our name, he speaks for us, and we participate in him, and this is how we participate in the priesthood, by actually offering. And as I said before, we not only offer the host, we can offer everything, all the problems we have, the people that we're praying for the direction in life, everything, sickness, everything we take to the Mass. And I don't have it with me. It's in the other book that Archbishop Sheehan, where he quotes people saying that there is the saints and the doctors, and actually the Council of Trent, saying that the Mass is the most sublime prayer. There is no prayer that we can say that is more powerful, more efficacious, more holy than the Mass, because the Mass is, first of all, directly established by Christ, and secondly, it is a participation in the supreme act of what Christ did, and that is the sacrifice of the cross. So that is the priesthood. What about victimhood? He says, our resemblance to Christ does not end with the priesthood. He is high priest, but likewise victim. And the desire of his Sacred Heart is that we should too share in this victimhood. It is above all by this that our souls will be transformed and become holy. Okay? Very interesting. He talks about in the Mass the symbolism that we see that shows this immolation, as it were, this victimhood. The fathers of the Church, first of all, they talk about the fact that of the symbolism, that this symbolism, he says, the bread is made of grains of wheat, ground and kneaded together so as to form one substance. So bread is just not one grain of wheat. You have to have all the grains ground together to make it. The wine is made of what? Not one grape,
Many grapes.
but many grapes, okay, pressed together, so that one beverage may flow from them. And then Abbot Marmion says that is the image of the union of the faithful with Christ and all the faithful with one another. So we are kind of ground together in that bread with Christ, ground together in that wine with our Lord. And many are together that are part of this wine, this bread and wine. Now, he gives an example from our friend the Yukis, the Eastern Rite, because they do things a little differently. I'll just read what he says here. Now, you might have seen before the Mass, and you see the priest has the bread. It's not a host; it's a little piece of bread. He's got the little knife, and he's carving it up. He's cutting it before the Mass begins. He cuts it. At the beginning of the Mass or the liturgy, the priest with a golden lance divides the bread into several fragments and assigns to each of them in a special prayer the part of representing the personages or categories of personages in whose honor for whom the sacrifice is about to be offered. Okay, so he divides the bread and does a little prayer. This represents this. This represents this. This represents this. Each fragment. Right? This is the Ukrainians. Yes, the first fragment represents Christ. Another, the Virgin Mary. Others represent the apostles, martyrs, virgins, the saint of the day, and all in the church triumphant. Next come the fragments reserved for the church suffering and the church militant. Okay? Church suffering, of course, those in purgatory. The church militant, all of us here on earth. The sovereign pontiffs, the bishops, and the faithful who are present. This function ended, the priest places all the fragments on the paten and offers them to God, for all will presently be transformed into the body of Jesus Christ. So that's showing then that this victimhood is we are represented in the host itself, and then this immolation takes place, as it were, at the consecration, the reenactment of Calvary, and we participate in that victimhood. This ceremony shows how close our union with Christ and the sacrifice ought to be. Then he talks about the Latin liturgy. Now, what happens when you're serving Mass and he first unites the water and the wine? How does he do it?
Oh no, he pours it himself.
Yeah, he puts just he has the chalice full of wine, and he puts just a tiny bit of water, just a little bit. Father Gruner, in fact, and other priests, they just take almost a little drop and put it in, just a little drop. And what does this ceremony signify? O God, who in creating human nature did wonderfully dignify it, and has still more wonderfully renewed it, grant that by the mystery of this water and wine we may be made partakers of his divinity, who would vouchsafe to become partakers of our humanity. So that's the first symbolism there. It is the union of water and wine. First of all, signifies the union of divinity and humanity in Christ. The wine, there's more of it, and it's a more precious liquid, as it were, is the divinity, and the water is the humanity. And then the same, it also symbolizes on another level, Marmion says, also symbolizes on another level our union with Christ in the sacrifice. Okay, the wine symbolizes Christ, the water symbolizes us, and this was actually confirmed in the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent actually teaches, vouchsafe, O Lord, to sanctify these gifts, and receiving the oblation of the spiritual victim, make us an eternal sacrifice to thyself. Okay, so that is our participation as victim. But Abbot Marmion goes on to say, but how then, how do we unite our Christ through victim? What is our victimhood? And our victimhood is sacrificing our will for Christ. Following God's commandments rather than our own will. We can give up a lot of things, but I'll tell you, to deny one's own will, that is the hardest thing to do. For all of us, it's the hardest thing to do. And if you remember in the definition of holiness, a God conforms by an ever-present act of his will. By an ever-present act of his will, he conforms to the holiness which is himself, the goodness which is himself. That's what our Blessed Mother did, an ever-present act of her will, conforming, and that's what we're supposed to do. By an ever-present act of our will, conforming our minds, our actions, our thoughts, and our whole being to the reality of Christ, to the law of Christ, to the will of Christ. So that is why it's called the immolation of our will. The immolation of our will. We are herein also the most certain means of being transformed into Christ, he said, especially if we unite ourselves to him in communion, which is the most fruitful partaking of the sacrifice of the altar. So all of this I talked about here, we haven't even gotten to receiving communion yet. This is the power and the efficacy and the graces of the Mass that take place, that we participate in, even before we receive communion. And then when we receive communion, there's all the graces that come with that. So the Mass is a powerhouse. It's a real powerhouse of grace, of goodness for us, given to us for us. And when we understand this, and also the type of things we talked about yesterday with adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, supplication, this is what you would call active participation of the laity. Active participation means that you are going through the mental and the spiritual actions in union with the priest. Why do I say that? Because part of the whole rolling out of the Novus Ordo was that we need more active participation of the laity. And they defined active participation by physical things. Holding hands. Let us offer each other the sign of peace. In the Novus Ordo, in some places, they have, now this is really repulsive, they have the ministry of greeters. You know the way when you walk into Walmart, you have this smiling artificial creature saying, "Good morning, and how are you? So happy to see you today." Or when you go onto a plane, the official, part of the official role of the stewardess is to welcome you. Why? Because planes are in the people business. And the purpose of planes is to shuttle people all over the place. You're always dealing with people, and you have to make the person's experience as pleasant as possible. So they're trained to smile. Even when you're leaving, you've seen it. Even sometimes the pilots are there, and they say goodbye. Thanks for flying with us. All that business. Okay, they've dragged it down to a vapid, insipid, asinine, artificial level. Active participation has to be something you can see and touch. It has to be, we all hold hands and smile. We has to be the priest, good morning, and that awful spectacle we saw at Aunt Helen's funeral.
And they have to have the people bringing up the offertory gifts.
Yeah, it's all physical. It's all physical. And ever since they started this active participation, what's happened?
People have left.
People have left the church.
Well, yeah, I guess it's better this way. Okay, bye.
It's true, yeah. We're going to talk about that a little more, too, on another aspect. And what it is in fact, Evelyn Waugh wrote a letter to the some Catholic newspaper. He was furious over all this childish bantering and handshaking and hugging and all this noise that suddenly came into the church. And he knew that a lot of these liturgical innovations were coming from Germany. And he said, let the Germans have their Zig Heils.
What is Zig Heil?
We want the peace of our Mass, something like that. We want our Mass to be in peace.
Dad, what is Zig Heil?
That's what they used to do to Hitler. Zig Heil! He wrote that and he got it published, yeah. Let the Germans have their Zig Heils.
Wait, Evelyn was a man?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
He married a lady named Evelyn Waugh, and they were supposed to be two nastiest people in the world.
Well, they were the two Evelyns, and anyway, that was actually an invalid marriage. It turned out he was able to get married again. But anyway, so this is active participation, and the thing is too is when you change. We're going to talk about the new Mass, the way it's changed the whole notion of sacrifice, changed so the emphasis is no longer on priest and victim. So when you take this away, all the theology that you've been given so far, when you got all that, and then you're supposed to have active participation to a man-centered liturgy, which is what the Novus Ordo is, then it's not surprising that everything with the Novus Ordo is man-centered. Get as many people up on the altar as possible. Get as many people doing the readings as possible. Get as many people in that silly little procession that they have, where they have the girl in the short shorts at World Youth Day holding the gospel book coming up, and get as many guitarists up in the sanctuary as possible, strumming away with capos, thoroughly mediocre and
I'll take a Coke bottle.
lousy players. Yeah, so once you change the whole idea of the Mass to a more human-centered thing, and then you elevate participation, an outward, noisy participation, then of course you're going to end up with a liturgy that is silly and banal and human-centered
And clownish.
and just full of people up in the so-called sanctuary. You almost need a a traffic officer.
A referee.
Yeah, you need a traffic officer and a green light and a red light to orchestrate it all. And they have parish councils, usually composed of women, making up creative liturgy and liturgical dance and all that business. And they call that active participation. And the real active participation that we talked about here, they don't even know about, because, especially the laity, it's not really their fault. It ain't their fault. They are not taught. They're not taught all this. And so they end up with a very Protestant and modern understanding of the Mass that is not
Catholic.
Catholic. That's right, not Catholic.
I didn't realize how bad it was.
So, well, you have to know not only what's happening, but also the principles on which they're operating, because they are operating on principles. The modernists are operating on principles. They just don't tell you it openly. You have to dig for it. Some of them do, in their own little workshops. Some of them do. So, here's back to Abbot Marmion. It is then a most excellent manner of assisting at the Holy Sacrifice to follow with the eyes, the mind, the heart, what is passing at the altar, and to associate ourselves with the prayer of the Church at this sacred moment. Okay? So this is, I want to see where we are here. Oh gosh, okay. I was going, I can yeah, this is the type of things we have to bring to Mass. It's like, Dr. White says, I read King Lear, it's boring.
No. King Lear is not boring. You are boring.
Yeah, King Lear is not boring. So when people even go to the Old Mass and they say it's meaningless, they're telling us more about themselves than they are about the Mass, and most of the time too, it's not their fault. They've been raised in this new thing, and we have people in the highest place who basically say there's no going back to that old liturgy, and even young people, well, it's just a fad for them. And Pope Francis said that. He says, I understand why the old people want the old Mass, but young people, why? It just must be a fad or a fashion, and it really doesn't require much of our attention. That's what he's saying about you. That's what he's saying about our children. Doesn't really, and it shows somebody who is thoroughly formed in a modernist mindset, that you would not want that old Mass that gives us all of what we've been talking about, that connection to, well, maybe I have time to do this. Maybe I'll take the time to do it. Because this is from Spirago, answering the question, why is the Mass in Latin? Oh.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Why is the Mass?
I shouldn't exist.
That's all right.
What did you do?
And
We were just making faces to reflect what Dad was doing, and then when he got to the why is the Latin, and Dad goes, oh, and Philomena and I went, ooh. But it's like, Spirago, really.
okay, these are really. This is what Father Spirago talks about of why we have Latin in the Mass. Why is the Mass in Latin? Because it is both venerable and mysterious, because it is a means of maintaining unity, and also it preserves the Mass from many evils. Latin, of course, is an ancient language. It's sublime, it's beautiful, and it's ancient in the sense that we know that what we hear at Mass, word for word, in many areas, probably in most areas, is the same that the persecuted Christians heard in the catacombs. It's a means of preserving that which is good and venerable by keeping it in Latin. The same sounds that they heard in the catacombs are the same sounds that we hear at Sunday Mass. The same words, the same prayers, the same phrasing. Also, mysterious. there really should be an element of mystery when we are dealing with the truths of the faith that are mysterious. Which one of us can say we understand the Trinity perfectly? Which one of us can understand we understand the hypostatic union of Jesus being both God and man?
Oh, me.
You can okay, well. Which one of us can say we understand transubstantiation or really fully understand how the Mass is the sacrifice of Calvary represented? Okay. We know that it's true. We seek to understand it, and we are able to understand it to a point, but we don't fully understand it because it is above our reason, especially something like the Trinity. Okay, it's above our reason. So it is fitting, and I would even say necessary, that the form of worship that we have in which these mysteries are contained, the worship itself should contain an element of mystery. Something that's taking us up and away from the mundane of daily life. It's one of the reasons, just for example, this is a very weak comparison, but it's one of the reasons why we like Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare takes us up and away from the normal, banal manner of speaking, totally awesome, you guys, that we hear all the time. Okay, and so when we go to see a Shakespeare play, we're not only entertained, but we're elevated. And also we sit there and think, how did he write like that?
Yeah.
How did he come up with these things? And
You're horrid.
so the fine arts are supposed to elevate us because they take us higher than the mundane of everyday life. Okay, so when it comes to the Mass, that should take us even higher into the realm of mystery. And so the rite in which we participate every Sunday, or for the lucky ones every day, that too is shrouded and elevated in mystery. What they used to do in the ancient church, Father Spirago says, is I want to make sure I got this right, from the Sanctus, holy, 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 from the Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus to the communion, they would pull a veil in front of the priest. That all that would go on behind the veil. And you wouldn't see it. You would know it was going on. You would have had the instructions, but you wouldn't see it. And it was to enhance the element of mystery. Okay? We don't have the veil anymore, but where do we go where we see something like that?
Confession?
Eastern Rite.
Eastern Rite. The Eastern Rite has that veil, as it were. It has that iconostas. And everything the priest is doing is not wide open like a theatrical stage. It's hidden. You have to kind of cock your head, and even then you only get a piece. You get a C, and it's like when St. John, a veil was lifted and he could see just a piece of heaven, and it I don't want to use modern terms. It was so sublime and so holy and so magnificent that he could barely handle it, and without the grace of God, he couldn't have handled it. Okay, so the Eastern Rite has maintained that iconostas in order to what? To give an element of mystery. And it's very interesting too, because once the Catholic Church threw all that down, and they even threw away they even tore out the altar rail, so there's no separation between the sanctuary and the pews, and that was done deliberately because, according to the new theology, hey man, there's no place that's just one sacred space, man. Like everything, the whole thing is sacred, man. So we don't just have like a sacred sanctuary, but everybody's involved, man.
Because God is everywhere, anyways. So.
That was the thinking, to take away the altar rail, to take away this idea of sanctuary, and to make everything sacred. And we know that when everything is sacred, then
nothing is sacred.
Nothing is sacred.
Because
Nothing
our
is
hot
sacred.
dog breakfast is the same.
So we see that. We see that there is in the church, we have the communion rail, and then there is the sanctuary, and there's something holy and cut off and consecrated and mysterious about it. So the Latin in the liturgy enhances that sense of mystery. Because remember, we're intellectual creatures, but we're also sensate creatures. And the Council of Trent even defined that it's good and to have bells and incense and all these things that appeal to the senses and elevate us. Okay? Supposedly, too, the Jews, even at the time of Christ, they used a more ancient form of prayer for their rituals. They didn't use everyday language. Next thing, it serves to maintain unity and to preserve from error. That should be pretty self-obvious. It should be. Now, he wrote this when Latin was still the official language of the Church. In a certain sense, it still is. The official documents are still in Latin. But now, of course, everything is in the vernacular. And many bishops themselves, and many priests themselves, they don't even know Latin anymore.
Oh boy.
They don't even know it. They're not taught it. And so the universal language of Latin, though, preserved unity because that was an expression and a means of maintaining the universality of the Church, that we all spoke one language, that we all attended the same exact Mass, whether you were in Japan or Anchorage, Alaska, or Brazil, or Timbuktu. It didn't matter. It was the same exact Mass. This really shows the universality of the Mass. And Father Spirago says the altar, too, the fact that the Latin prayers are said at the altar, and he says the altar is kind of a heavenly Jerusalem that everybody comes to. You remember we said that the Paschal of Jerusalem, you had to come to Jerusalem for the feast. And the altar of the Catholic Church is kind of a heavenly Jerusalem where we all gather. Of all these different nations of people that the Catholic Church is, we all gather there. Also, Latin helps us remember that we are dependent on the Rome of all time, which is the head of the Church, which is the Pope, which is the See of Peter. Latin, everything being in Latin, always points us towards the head of the, and the movement now, which is not a good movement, is the de-Romanization of the Church, to stress more the internationality of it. And what you do is you break it down into a Tower of Babel type of setup, but we won't go into that right now. And of course, finally, preserving of error. When you're using a dead language, God bless you. When you're using a dead language and the priest is reciting and praying the prayers prescribed for him in a language that he doesn't normally speak, it's a means of preserving the Mass from error, from erroneous doctrines being slipped in, by erroneous ideas being slipped in, keeping us from improv. It keeps us from improv. Okay, now the nature of jazz is improvisation. But Elizabeth, that Bach cello piece that you just learned, which one is it? Number 2.
Prelude.
Prelude. Try improvising in that.
No.
It's just not possible. It's just not possible.
Ruin it.
It's so perfectly structured.
It is. Because it's Bach.
It's so perfectly structured. It's such a work of genius that you don't touch it, and you don't even think to touch it. But if you're playing Birdland, or A Nightingale in Berkeley Square, or Girl from Ipanema, or Satin Doll, you start to fiddle around a little bit while you're playing. You just don't play the melody. The first thing a jazz player does is he starts running around the melody. He starts to improv. Okay. The Mass was kept in the Latin to. And there's nothing wrong with improv where it belongs, but it doesn't belong in the Mass. Because doctrinal purity is necessary for the Mass, because for the vast majority of Catholics, what is their one Catholic experience every week?
The Mass.
The Mass.
Oui. Yes.
The Mass. It is the one for most people, most Catholics. Most Catholics don't go to Mass every day. Most Catholics only go on Sunday, those who practice. I'm not talking about the ones that just show up on Christmas and Easter or whatever. But they, yeah, like the ones that we saw this time around. They, and so
Oh boy.
the doctrine of the church has to be properly delivered through the liturgy. And so it's very important to have doctrinal security. We have now people in high place who mock the idea of doctrinal security. That it's kind of a snobbishness. Okay, it's beyond insane. So another reason why is that we know too that people understand what's going on at Mass. You always understood growing up what the Mass was. I never heard one of you say, how come the canon isn't in English? Because I don't understand what's going on. None of you ever said that because you were raised in the Old Mass, and also the readings, on Sunday at least, are in English. The sermon is in English. You get your instruction, but the primary purpose of the Mass is not instruction. The primary purpose of the Mass is to offer the sacrifice to God for the living and the dead, the representation of Calvary, and instruction is secondary, but it is still important because the Council of Trent, it's dogmatically defined in the Council of Trent that the priests are bound to teach the people what is the Mass and what goes on at the Mass. It's in session 22. I forget which article. Session 22. And the Council of Trent, which is an infallible act of the Church, condemns, prohibits the Mass said entirely in the vernacular. You know what the vernacular is?
The language.
Your native tongue. What's going on in all the parish churches?
How are you doing today?
Well, everything is in the vernacular. Everything is in the vernacular, and the entire parish bodies are operating in open defiance of a defined article of the Council of Trent. This, Father Gomer de Paul says this. It's easy to understand why we are so lacking in grace, and we're so lacking in understanding, because it's a kind of a punishment that we have rejected what God has given us. We've come up with our own concoction, and we expect to be blessed the same way we would if we followed the actual real thing. So he says, I think I missed something here. Oh, yeah, that's what I said earlier. The ceremony of the Mass is primarily an action, not words. It is primarily the consecration, the representation of Calvary. And he says another evil consequent upon such a change would be a lessening of the respect felt for the holy sacrifice. Now, he wrote this around 1910. It's exactly what happened. A lessening of the respect because you've taken away that sacred atmosphere of Latin. You've taken away that sacred atmosphere, that preservation of the prayers and the doctrinal purity of the prayers. And everything is sacred, which means nothing is sacred, which means an introduction to the banal. You go to Mass in shorts and a halter top and all these things, as if you're going to a picnic. And so
I wouldn't wear shorts and a halter top to a picnic. Though. I mean,
I know that, as if someone is the way it's dressed now. So we have a better understanding, hopefully, of not only the doctrine of the Mass, but also how we participate through the acts: adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication, and especially remembering that we participate in the priesthood of Christ, and we participate in the victimhood of Christ. And that the Latin in the Mass, not even talking about the prayers itself, but the Latin in the Mass, just talking about the formula, is a means of it's venerable because it goes back to the ancient times with our forefathers in the catacombs. It gives us the air of mystery. It is a means of unity that wherever I go, I've traveled throughout the world, I go to the same Mass wherever I go. I don't have to worry about not understanding the priest. And also it preserves it from error and preserves it from putrefaction. So that's it. Sound production copyright Olteen Library Services, all rights reserved, www.oltyn.org. Visit our webpage for more titles.